So my parents' generation, my grandparents do believe that gender is something that's set in stone and they equate it with sex. I mean, I don't want to say that everybody's doing this. This is changing as well. But what I'm wondering is if this is not the case, why is it that people seem to have always believed this? Is this where like, a
Oh,
Marxist analysis might be helpful, or psychoanalysis, or maybe you just think I'm wrong?
I think you might be wrong.
Okay.
Um, I think there are native cultures in which there have always been third spirits.
Okay, true. Very true.
I think there are a variety of South African vernaculars that allow for different forms of gender without using that word, um, depending on the social role and the meaning that somebody has in the context of their community and family or larger kinship organization. Um, and I could give you many examples. I mean, the truth is that people who don't fall into either category, including the so-called hermaphrodites studied by John Money, have always been excluded from society or shamed or sequestered, sent away. So in previous generations, it was just considered to be shameful if you didn't have the proper morphology. You just had to be hidden. So what we then end up taking for granted is a naturalized sense of reality that has depended on shame and exclusion in order to appear natural. So the ridicule you hear, ridicule of trans people, is linked to contempt, hatred, but also crimes against trans people, vicious crimes, harassment, and murder. We see very high rates of murder in several countries in the world, especially in Brazil, for instance, where it starts as ridicule and it ends up in a violent attack and a death. So
Weren't you also recently attacked in Brazil?
I was attacked in 2017. Not luckily, they didn't get to me physically, but they did threaten me physically because they believed that I was the founder of the idea of gender and that I was a demonic force.
They literally believed this.
Yes.
Interesting. It sounds like it was a religious conviction.
Well, it was a politicized religious conviction. I mean, there are all sorts of traditional religious people who say sex is sex or a family should be a man and a woman, uh, who live with that idea, but they're not going to take to the streets or try to hurt somebody um, if they have a different opinion.
What sort of event was this?
It was on the future of democracy.
Okay.
It had nothing to do with gender.
Okay. It was just sort of an organized.
Yeah, it was called the Ends of Democracy. It was
Okay.
a critical theory association.
Interesting. Well, I totally walked into being wrong there when I said that for all time people have thought there was this immutable gender dichotomy. I shouldn't have said that because I was certainly excluding other cultures. I should have been much more specific and said maybe in Western cultures, or at least the Western culture I know, it has always seemed that way since I was a child. And I think there
Yes, many of us are taught that, and we
yeah.
live in a world where that's the abiding supposition. But for intersex people, right, and they didn't choose their condition, and a lot of trans people also feel like they have not chosen their condition. Um, uh, the boxes we use or the perceptions we make about what is natural and right and inevitable don't include them as living human beings. So we either can change our categories and become more humane, or we insist on our categories and they suffer feeling less than human.
But what I wanted to ask was why you think it is that we're all brought up taught this way. Why this is
Well, maybe
something.
not everybody is. Maybe in certain cultures we're brought up
Right,
to
right.
think that way.
In our culture. And I'm wondering.
I don't know if we share a culture at this moment, though. When you say in our culture,
Okay.
are we talking about the U.S.? Are we talking about the Western or Northern Hemisphere? I'm not sure where we are when you
Sure.
say
I
that.
guess I am just thinking of United States, my peers growing up in Chicago, being here. I mean, people my age don't think this way now, but it does seem to be how we were taught.
But if you had grown up on the outside of that and you saw everybody believing that and acting as if it was true and necessary, and you were on the outside of that, you probably felt fear, shame, less than worthy, less than human. You might have feared violence. You might have looked for company among others who were on the outside of that assumption. But for a long time we thought black people didn't deserve citizenship in the United States, and it was considered naturally to be the case. It seemed like a shared cultural assumption. For a long time we thought women were inferior to men, and it was just that way. But there are times where you then meet people or have experiences where some of those fundamental suppositions that you always thought were true, or that were in fact shared among your peers, get called into question. That's part of the reason we like education, right? And defend it, because we all come to college and university with certain ideas of what's true and real and necessary. And very often we read things or we encounter people who make us rethink what we took to be clearly the case.